Skyscrapers have pierced the air for over 150 years, but occasionally these huge structures are damaged, fall out of favor, or outlive their original purpose. Don't forget to watch today's video till the very end, as we'll be making you accustomed with the top 10 tallest building demolitions in the world. They soar high above the world's cities, glittering symbols of mankind's power and wealth. But sometimes what goes up has to come down. When they are damaged or fall out of favor, or outlive their original purpose, very tall buildings occasionally have to be flattened. But doing so is an extremely tricky task. And as skyscrapers rise higher and higher each year, the task of bringing them back down becomes increasingly complicated. Almost everyone has seen spectacular footage of towers being blown up with explosives. The knack of getting an edifice to collapse onto itself, known as implosion, is a highly skilled specialism. In the kind of densely built areas where high buildings tend to proliferate, however, such demolitions are not generally permitted. As a result, engineers have had to come up with increasingly innovative ways of felling tall structures. There's an art and a science to it, says Michael Taylor, Executive Director of the National Demolition Association, which represents U.S. contractors and specialists in the industry. One of the more elaborate techniques, pioneered in 2008 by Japanese construction firm Kajima, involves knocking out the bottom floor and lowering the structures above it on computer-controlled hydraulic jacks. Stop-motion footage of the system makes it look as though a 20-story building is sinking into the ground. Developers may have to think even more creatively in the future. The world's tallest skyscraper, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, is at 2,722, vastly taller than anything that has been leveled before. The highest reaching tower to be peacefully demolished was the 47-story, 612 feet, 187-meter Singer Building in New York, which was taken down manually between 1967 and 1968. How exactly someone would go about dismantling the new breed of megatall structures like the Burj Khalifa is unclear. The short answer is that we don't know, says Anthony Wood, Executive Director of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. However, demolition experts have extensive experience of taking apart edifices of an earlier vintage. At present, buildings in closely packed downtown urban districts tend to be dismantled manually. There are a number of ways to do it. One method involves the team of engineers dismantling the building top to bottom, floor by floor. However, fire or structural damage might render this unsafe. Instead, the demolition crew could use a high-reach mechanical excavator with a long arm to pull down the upper stories. After the New Zealand earthquakes of 2010 and 2011, a 65-meter device of this kind, nicknamed Twinkle Toes, was imported from the UK to pull down damaged high-rises in Christchurch. Alternatively, if the exterior wall is a curtain, that is, it is not part of the structure, but forms an outer covering, typically made of glass, it can be pulled inside the structure using a crane, once the interior has been gutted. In some cities, however, it may still be permitted to blow the building up. The term implosion is something of a misnomer. In fact, the technique involves strategically placing explosive charges to remove a building support structure so that it collapses on itself, causing as little damage to its surroundings as possible. The results are quick. Typically, an implosion takes 8 seconds, and spectacular. Footage of such operations, such as that to take down the 29-floor J.L. Hudson department store in Detroit, Michigan, the largest building ever to be imploded, make compelling viewing. However, carrying out such a demolition involves painstaking preparation. It can take up to 6 months to survey the structure and prepare it for the blast by removing non-load-bearing walls, weakening support structures, and fitting the charges. Clearing up debris afterwards can take up to 2 months. Also, the results can be disastrous if something goes wrong. In 1997, 9 people were injured and a 12-year-old girl was killed by flying masonry during the demolition of the Royal Canberra Hospital in Australia. When carried out correctly, these demolitions can be achieved with a high degree of accuracy. According to Taylor, the 1991 implosion of Orlando City Hall, which featured in the film Lethal Weapon 3, was achieved without breaking a single window on an adjacent building 4 feet away. The symbolism of blowing something up in front of large crowds of onlookers has regularly been harnessed by politicians and developers, particularly in the case of unpopular high-rise public housing projects, Taylor believes. Let's not forget the political effect of it, he says. Partly for this reason, implosions tend to occur in areas of urban deprivation. However, remarkably few skyscrapers in places like Manhattan and Chicago, where the first such multi-story structures sprung up, have been dismantled, despite them having been with us since the late 19th century. All in all, what goes up must come down. Though the saying pertains to gravity, so it, unfortunately, goes with many buildings. Before architectural preservation took precedence, structures with significant historical value were often demolished to make way for more modern builds on their sites, or they were destroyed in disasters like fire. While we respect the notion of growth and change in architecture, we lament the loss of these 10 historic buildings around the world. Number 10. The original Penn Station, New York. Across the world, train stations have long been designed as beautiful structures, showing off a city's engineering prowess and fine aesthetic sensibility. So how did New York end up with the underwhelming Penn Station? The original structure was a McKim, Mead and White designed Beaux Arts masterpiece, complete with arched ceilings and plenty of natural light. But it was torn down in 1963 to make room for Madison Square Garden. Number 9. The Grand Court at the Trans-Mississippi Exposition, Omaha, Nebraska. Many impressive buildings were constructed for World's Fairs across the globe, but unfortunately, the majority of them were only temporary. Such is the case with the Grand Court Complex designed for the 1898 Trans-Mississippi Exposition in Omaha, Nebraska. Greco-Roman palaces surrounding a lagoon housed many of the main exhibitions here. Number 8. The Wabash Terminal, Pittsburgh. Architect Theodore Karlink designed this 1903 train station in Pittsburgh in the Beaux Arts style for Pittsburgh Terminal Railway, part of the Wabash Railroad. The station served passengers only through 1931 due to the railway's business failure. Then it simply became an office building. It was torn down in 1954. Number 7. The Paleis voor Volksvleit, Amsterdam. Inspired by London's Crystal Palace, architect Cornelius Vanderbilt built this exhibition hall in Amsterdam in 1864. It also served as a major entertainment center, hosting concerts in its theater and housing several shops. A fire destroyed the main building in 1929. Though its arcade survived, it was, however, demolished in 1961. Number 6. The Chicago Federal Building, Chicago. In the late 19th century, architect Henry Ives Cobb was tasked with designing Chicago's new federal building, which would replace the smaller one that the city had quickly outgrown. He created a Beaux Arts structure with a monumental gilt dome that opened in 1905. Just 60 years later, the building was raised in favor of a more modern one. Number 5. The Old Main Library, Cincinnati. Though unassuming on the outside, the Old Main Library of Cincinnati housed a spectacular main atrium with cast-iron spiral staircases leading to rows and rows of bookshelves. Architect J.W. McLaughlin was the mastermind behind the interiors, which opened to the public in 1874. This library was torn down in 1955, when a contemporary building was constructed just down the street to house the books. Number 4. The Cornelius Vanderbilt II House, New York. The eldest grandson of business magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt had this massive mansion constructed for him on the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street. With 130 rooms, it was the largest private house in New York City. 40 years after its construction, the house was sold to real estate developers, who demolished it in 1926 to build Bergdorf Goodman. Parts of the home were distributed to sites across the country. In New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art has one of the fireplaces, and the property's gates now guard the Conservatory Garden in Central Park. Number 3. The Church of the Archangel Michael, Warsaw, Poland. This elaborate Russian Orthodox church was built in 1894, during a period that saw the construction of many houses of worship for Russian troops who occupied Poland. When those soldiers left after World War I, the Russian Revival-style church fell into disrepair, and the structure was demolished in 1923. Number 2. The Singer Tower, New York. When the 47-story headquarters of the Singer Manufacturing Company was completed in 1908, it held the title of the world's tallest building. But today, the building holds a different record. It was the tallest building in the world to be purposely demolished. The earnest flag-designed structure was torn down in 1968 and ultimately replaced by the building now known as One Liberty Plaza. Number 1. The Crystal Palace, London. Built by Joseph Paxton for the Great Exhibition of 1851. Often considered the first World's Fair, the Crystal Palace was one of the most masterful feats of engineering at the time. The 1,851-foot-long building was constructed with cast iron and sheet glass. But in 1936, the building caught fire and was destroyed. With that, we come to the end of today's video.